The Red Keep was alive with the scent of burning torches and the low murmurs of courtiers as Rhaenyra Targaryen stood before her father, King Viserys I. The great hall, which had so often been a place of grand feasts and whispered schemes, now felt suffocating. She had known this moment was coming. Her father had insisted that she must wed, that the strength of her claim as heir to the Iron Throne depended on it. In another life, in another turn of fate, she might have been forced into a political marriage with Rhaenyra Velaryon, a match of convenience, not passion. But tonight, as the king's voice echoed through the chamber, she realized fate had taken a different course. Sir Harwin Strong, Viserys declared, "You have served my daughter loyally, and the realm has taken note. A man of strength, honor, and love." There were gasps, murmurs of disbelief. House Velaryon's pride was wounded. But Corlys Velaryon, though furious, remained silent, his lips pressed into a hard line. The Velaryons had power, but even they would not openly defy the king. Rhaenyra, clad in black and red, turned to Harwin. He stood tall, a lion among men, his golden brown curls framing a face of rugged handsomeness. He had always been more than just her sworn shield. He had been her protector, her confidant, her lover. He met her gaze, and in that moment, she knew. There would be no whispers of bastardy, no question of their children's legitimacy. This was her choice. And so, with a nod to her father, she spoke the words that would change the fate of Westeros forever. "I will wed Sir Harwin Strong." The wedding of Rhaenyra Targaryen and Sir Harwin Strong was unlike any the realm had seen. It lacked the political grandiosity of a Velaryon match, but it was not without spectacle. The Red Keep's halls were draped in the black and red of House Targaryen, the air thick with the scent of burning incense and the soft melodies of harps. Viserys had spared no expense in ensuring his daughter's union was blessed by grandeur. Though beneath the surface, the court was uneasy. There were whispers among the lords, hushed conversations behind goblets of Dornish wine. "This is an insult to House Velaryon," murmured Otto Hightower to his daughter Queen Alicent, who sat rigid at the high table, her green gown shimmering under the glow of the chandeliers. Alicent's fingers curled tightly around her goblet, her expression unreadable. "It is an insult to the realm," she said finally. "She should have wed Rhaenor. Now, even if she births sons, there will be no Valyrian blood in their veins." Otto nodded. "And the succession will be questioned. You must prepare, my daughter." Elsewhere in the hall, Corlys Velaryon sat beside his wife Rhaenys. His face was carved from stone, betraying nothing, but Rhaenys saw the rage in his clenched fists. Their son, Rhaenor, should have been the groom tonight. "We are not the only ones displeased," Rhaenys whispered. Corlys followed her gaze to the lords of the realmsome applauding, others exchanging wary glances. House Velaryon had been slighted, and in doing so, Viserys had fractured the unity he so desperately clung to. Yet, at the heart of it all, Rhaenyra and Harwin stood together, unbothered by the political storm raging around them. He looked at her as no man ever had, with love, with pride, with devotion that no arranged marriage could ever produce. As the feast raged on and the wine flowed, Harwin leaned in and murmured against her ear, "You are radiant." She smirked. "You are drunk. On you, always." Laughter bubbled in her chest, a rare moment of lightness amidst the tension. She had made her choice, and though the realm might rage, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. She felt free. Moon after moon passed, and soon the realm was abuzz with the news that Rhaenyra was with child. Unlike in the other timeline, there were no whispers in the corridors, no sidelong glances at the babe's features, no murmured doubts about his parentage. When the day finally came, and Rhaenyra screamed her way through the agony of labor, Harwin was there, standing steadfast by her side, a rare privilege for a husband, especially one who was not a king. And when their son was placed in her arms, slick with the blood of his mother and crying with the strength of a dragon's roar, Harwin whispered, Jacaerys Velaryon in another world. But here, Jacaerys Strong, the firstborn of Princess Rhaenyra, the undisputed heir to the Iron Throne, Viserys wept when he held the boy. "A true dragon," he murmured, pressing a kiss to his grandson's brow. He ordered a grand feast and celebration, inviting every noble house to see the future of the realm. For a brief moment, there was hope, but not everyone was pleased. In the halls of the Red Keep, Queen Alicent paced, her lips pressed into a thin line. Across from her, Otto Hightower sipped his wine. "The boy is healthy, strong," Otto said, the word laced with meaning. "The longer he lives, the firmer Rhaenyra's claim becomes." Alicent exhaled sharply. "Viserys will never change his mind. Number, but he will not live forever." Otto leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You must act now, while Aegon is still young, while the nobles still whisper. The realm will never accept a woman on the throne if there is a son of royal blood to take her place." Alicent looked toward the chamber where her own son, Aegon, played with his brother Aemond. They were Targaryens by name, but to many, their mother's Hightower blood tainted them. The people would accept Rhaenyra's son because he was born of fire and Valyrian descent. Her grip on her skirts tightened. "Then we must ensure they never forget Aegon's birthright." The seeds of war had been planted. While the Hightowers plotted, House Strong flourished. Lord Lionel Strong, still Hand of the King, wielded power with quiet wisdom. Harwin, already the strongest knight in the realm, became a legend, known not just as Breakbones, but as the dragon's shield, the man who stood unshaken at Rhaenyra's side. His influence grew as he trained his son, teaching Jacaerys the way of the sword, the way of power, and most importantly, the way of survival. "Power is not given, my son," Harwin told him one day, watching as the boy struggled against a wooden practice sword. "It is taken, and to keep it, you must be willing to fight for it." Jacaerys, even at 5 years old, nodded solemnly. He would not grow up in a world where his mother's claim was questioned. Neither would his brothers, Lucerys and Joffrey, both born in the years that followed. All three had the dark curls of House Strong and the dragon's fire in their veins. And when they took to the skies on their dragons, no one could deny it. But peace is a fleeting thing in Westeros, and power is a dangerous thing to hold. As the years passed, the Red Keep became a battlefield not of swords and blood, but of whispers and alliances. The court had become divided into two factions, those who supported Rhaenyra and those who whispered of Aegon's claim. Though Viserys still sat upon the throne, his health was failing. The king had grown weary of conflict, turning a blind eye to the growing tensions between his daughter and his wife. But even as he aged, one thing remained unchanged: his unwavering support for Rhaenyra as his heir. Despite the murmurs of discontent, the realm had little ground to challenge her claim. Unlike in the other timeline, there were no whispers of bastardy to stain her children. Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey were true-born Targaryens in the eyes of the realm, their legitimacy unquestioned. But legitimacy alone did not secure a throne. Strength did, and Alicent Hightower knew that. While Rhaenyra ruled Dragonstone as Princess of the Realm, Alicent and Otto worked tirelessly in the shadows. In the corridors of the Red Keep, Otto gathered lords who sympathized with Aegon's claim. The Hightowers still controlled the faith of the Seven, and through it, they began to sow doubt in the minds of the people. A woman has never ruled the Seven Kingdoms. The gods do not wish for a queen to sit upon the Iron Throne. Rhaenyra will bring war. And so the whispers spread, creeping through the streets of King's Landing like wildfire. Alicent, ever the dutiful queen, played her role well. She visited the septs, spoke softly to noblewomen, and ensured that Aegon was always seen in court golden-haired, laughing, the very image of a young king. But it was not enough. Rhaenyra was still the heir. And as long as King Viserys lived, they could do nothing to change that. For years, House Velaryon had distanced itself from the crown, wounded by Rhaenyra's choice to marry Harwin Strong instead of Laenor. But time heals all wounds, or at least, political necessity does. Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, was not a man to hold grudges forever. He had spent years expanding his power in the Stepstones, securing his fleet's dominance over the narrow sea. But his bloodline was weakening. Laenor was gone, and Laena had died in childbirth, leaving his granddaughters Baela and Rhaena as his only direct heirs. He needed a strong alliance. And so, with time, he turned his gaze back to Rhaenyra. When the raven arrived at Dragonstone, bearing a message marked with a sigil of House Valyrian, Rhaenyra smiled. "The sea snake returns," she murmured to Harwin, handing him the letter. Harwin read the words carefully before chuckling. "It seems he wishes to mend the past." "Not the past," Rhaenyra corrected. "The future." In the moons that followed, a new alliance was forged. Rhaenyra betrothed Jacaerys to Baela Velaryon, and Lucerys to Rhaena Velaryon, uniting their bloodlines once more. The might of House Velaryon and House Strong now stood behind her claim, and the Hightowers felt the threat like a blade at their throats. The growing tension between the Blacks and the Greens could not remain in the shadows forever. The younger generation born into this silent war would be the ones to draw the first blood. It happened in the training yard of the Red Keep. Jacaerys, now a strong young boy of 10, was sparring with his younger brother Lucerys when Aegon and Aemond arrived. Aemond, taller and more aggressive than his older brother, sneered at them. "Your mother may call you her heir, but we all know the truth," he taunted. "A woman can never rule." Jacaerys, usually calm, stepped forward. "Say that again," Aemond smirked. "I said," before he could finish, Jacaerys' fist crashed into his jaw, sending him sprawling onto the ground. The training yard erupted into chaos. Lucerys tackled Aegon, while the squires and knights rushed to separate them. By the time it was over, Aemond's nose was broken. Aegon had bruises blooming across his ribs, and Jacaerys stood tall, unbowed. When Viserys heard what had happened, he did something no one expected. He laughed. "Are true Targaryens," he said, shaking his head. "Fire made flesh." But Alicent did not laugh. That night, as she pressed a damp cloth to Aemond's swollen face, she seethed. "This cannot go on," she whispered to Otto. "Viserys will not punish her sons. He will not see the truth." Otto's expression was grim. "Then we must prepare, my daughter. The time will come when Aegon must take what is rightfully his." Alicent turned to Aemond, who sat glaring into the fire. "Do not forget this moment," she told him. "Do not forget the pain they caused you." And Aemond never did. Viserys, ever the peacemaker, tried to mend the growing rift, but he was blind to one simple truth: this war could not be stopped. Not now. Not when Alicent and Otto were already plotting. Not when Rhaenyra's sons were growing stronger. Not when the realm was already choosing sides. The next great shift in power would come with Viserys' death. But death had a way of creeping in when least expected. And soon, the Iron Throne would be fought for in fire and blood. The air in the Red Keep was heavy with the stench of sickness and death. King Viserys I Targaryen, once a proud ruler, now lay on his grand bed, frail and gasping for breath. His body had been failing him for years, and the maesters could do nothing but offer milk of the poppy to ease his pain. Beside him, Rhaenyra clutched his hand, her heart pounding as she watched her father struggle for each breath. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for her entire life. "I have kept my word, father," she whispered. "I have stayed true to my claim, to the realm, to you." Viserys' cloudy eyes flickered, a faint smile on his cracked lips. He had fought for her, defended her right to rule, but even kings could not defy death. That night, as the candles burned low and the halls of the Red Keep fell silent, King Viserys took his final breath. And before dawn, the realm would be at war. Rhaenyra should have been crowned in the great hall of the Red Keep the next day. She should have ascended the Iron Throne, as her father had decreed. But as she grieved in Dragonstone, the Hightowers made their move. Under the cover of night, Otto Hightower gathered the small council, shutting the doors to all but those loyal to the Greens. The air was thick with treachery as Otto stood, his voice calm but commanding. "The king is dead," he announced. His words met with silence. "And we must act before chaos descends upon the realm." Lords exchanged uneasy glances, but Alicent was the one to speak next. "My husband wanted Aegon to rule," she said. "With his dying breath, he spoke his will. It was a lie, but it was a convincing lie." Some on the council protested. Lord Beesbury, old and stubborn, rose to declare Rhaenyra the rightful heir, but Sir Criston Cole silenced him forever, slamming his head into the table. There would be no more debate. Aegon, too, was to be crowned. Before the sun rose, ravens were intercepted, guards sworn to Rhaenyra were quietly executed, and King's Landing belonged to the Hightowers. And as the dawn broke over the city, Aegon was crowned before the masses, the people cheering for their new king, while his true-born sister remained in the dark, until the raven came. Rhaenyra stood in the great hall of Dragonstone, the letter from King's Landing clenched in her trembling hands. "They stole my throne," she whispered, her voice low and dangerous. Harwin Strong, standing beside her, exhaled sharply. "They have betrayed you." She did not look at him. She was looking at her sons. Jacaerys, now a young man of 15, clenched his fists. His birthright had been taken. His mother had been betrayed. Lucerys and Joffrey stood behind him, their young faces twisted with confusion and anger, and behind them the dragons stirred. Syrax let out a low, guttural growl, sensing her rider's fury. Vermax, Arax, and Tyrexes shifted uneasily in the Dragonmont. They knew. War had come. Rhaenyra turned to her lord's house Valerian. House strong, though still loyal to her father's word. "They have crowned Aegon," she said, her voice calm but edged with venom. "They have stolen what is mine. They believe I will sit idle." She looked at her eldest son. "You are my heir, Jace, and you will fly." Jacaerys nodded, his jaw set. "Where do you wish me to go, mother?" "To the lords who still honor their oaths," she said. "To Winterfell, to the Vale, to the Riverlands. We must remind them of their loyalty." Then she turned to Lucerys, her second son, who was barely past 13, but already a dragon rider. "And you, my son, will go to Storm's End." Lucerys hesitated, but he nodded. Harwin stiffened beside Rhaenyra, his father's instinct warring with duty, but he said nothing. They all knew what had to be done. Rhaenyra looked at her men, her lords, her sons. "We will not let treachery stand," she said. "We will take back what is ours." And with that, the first dragons took flight. As Jacaerys and Lucerys flew to rally support, the first act of war was already in motion. In King's Landing, Aemon Targaryen had overheard the raven's message. He knew where Lucerys was going, and so, without waiting for orders, he mounted Vhagar. The storm was coming, and soon blood would rain from the sky. The wind howled as Lucerys Valerian Young, determined and too brave for his own good, ascended from the sky on Arax, his pale dragon flapping its wings against the storm. Rain lashed against his face as he approached the castle of Storm's End, the stronghold of House Baratheon. He had come with his mother's words ringing in his ears. "You are a prince of the realm. You bear no weapons. You come only as a messenger." But Rhaenyra had not foreseen what awaited him. As Lucerys dismounted, his heart froze. Vhagar was already there. The ancient beast, larger than any living dragon, loomed in the courtyard like a shadow of death. The storm around them roared, but the dragon's presence was more terrifying than the thunder itself. And standing beside her, watching with a cruel smirk, was Prince Aemond Targaryen. Lucerys swallowed hard. He was too late. Inside the great hall, Lord Boros Baratheon sat upon his throne, his heavy brow furrowed as he considered the two Targaryen princes before him. Aemond had arrived first, with a proposal of marriage, a daughter of House Baratheon, in exchange for loyalty to Aegon II. Lucerys had come with only words, and Boros was not a man swayed by words. "I am no king," he said, his voice rough as stone, "but I know this man does not break an oath lightly. My father swore loyalty to your mother, boy, but a promise of marriage is worth more than loyalty to a dead king." Lucerys felt his stomach drop. Then Aemon stepped forward. "Lord Boros," he drawled, his sapphire eye gleaming, "if this boy cannot bring you a bride, then perhaps he will give you an eye instead." Lucerys stiffened. "A debt is owed. Aemond continued, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Let us settle it now, nephew. Take out your knife and let us see if you have the courage to give me what is mine." Lucerys reached for his own sword, but stopped himself. He was not here to fight. "I will not draw steel against you," he said firmly. "I came only as a messenger." Boros Baratheon let out a bark of laughter. "Then run, pup. Fly home to your mother." Lucerys turned without another word, his heart hammering in his chest as he walked back to the courtyard. He knew what would happen next. He had to get to Arax. Lucerys mounted his dragon, gripping the reins tightly. "Fly, Arax," he commanded. "Fly fast!" As they lifted into the stormy sky, a monstrous roar split the heavens. Vhagar had taken flight. Aemond had given no orders, no commands to stay his hand. This was no longer a game to him. This was vengeance. Lucerys and Arax were smaller, faster, weaving through the storm like a flickering flame. But Vhagar was death incarnate, an ancient horror whose wings could block out the sun. The chase was short. The moment Lucerys thought he had lost Aemond in the clouds, a terrible shadow loomed overhead. Arax shrieked, twisting desperately to escape, but it was too late. Vhagar's jaws snapped shut. For a brief moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Lucerys Velaryon fell. He did not scream, as the storm swallowed him whole. In the skies above Storm's End, Prince Aemond smiled, and the war was no longer just whispers in the dark. It had truly begun. When word reached Dragonstone, it came not with a raven but with a storm. Harwin Strong knew the moment he saw Rhaenyra's face that something had happened. Something terrible. She had not spoken a word since the news arrived, but her expression said everything. Jacaerys, her eldest, stood beside her, his hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of grief and fury. Rhaenyra stared out toward the sea, her body trembling with an anger so deep, so consuming, that even her dragons felt it. Syrax, sensing her rider's grief, let out a keening wail that echoed across the castle. Then, finally, Rhaenyra turned. She looked at her lords Corlys Velaryon, Daemon Targaryen, Harwin Strong, and the men who had stood by her. "An eye for an eye," she said, her voice quiet. Then she lifted her gaze to Daemon. "A son for a son." Daemon did not hesitate. He smiled. In the days that followed, chaos erupted across Westeros. Daemon flew to King's Landing under the cover of night, and Lord Larys Strong, the scheming master of whispers, met his end in the dungeonous body never found. Sir Criston Cole rode to Harrenhal, only to find Harwin Strong and his men waiting for him. A skirmish erupted, one that Harwin barely survived, but Criston escaped. And in the halls of King's Landing, Queen Alicent wept when she found her youngest son, Prince Daeron, slain in his bedchamber message written in his own blood. Fire and blood. Rhaenyra had made her move. The dance of the dragons had truly begun. The war had been inevitable. The moment Aemond took Lucerys' life, the moment blood was spilled for the sake of a throne, there was no turning back. King's Landing belonged to the Greens, but the skies belonged to the Blacks. From Dragonstone to the Riverlands, from the Reach to the north, ravens flew, swords were sharpened, dragons stirred in their lairs, and Rhaenyra Targaryen was done waiting. Sir Criston Cole had believed himself victorious when he marched upon Harrenhal, claiming it in the name of King Aegon II. He had not expected Harwin Strong. The moment Criston's forces occupied the ancient ruin, Harwin arrived with an army behind him. The Riverlords had not forgotten their loyalty to the princess, nor did they forget that Harrenhal was the seat of House Strong. And more importantly, they did not forget Lucerys Velaryon. As Harwin rode through the gates of Harrenhal, his voice rang through the keep. "For my son, for my wife, and for vengeance." The battle was brutal. The strong men, alongside Blackwood and Tully forces, cut through Criston Cole's men like a storm through dry grass. Harwin himself led the charge, his hammer breaking shields, shattering bones. Criston barely escaped with his life, retreating with what few men he had left. And as the last of them fled, Harwin raised the black dragon banner of House Targaryen above Harrenhal once more. Rhaenyra's banners flew over the Riverlands. the war had truly begun. While Harwin fought for his family's legacy, Daemon Targaryen moved like a shadow through the realm. The rogue prince had always been a man of action. He would not sit idly while his wife's throne was stolen. And so, as the sun set over King's Landing, Daemon arrived in the city not alone, but on dragonback. Caraxes descended upon the capital, his roar shaking the very walls of the Red Keep. The people of the city, once loyal to Aegon II, now cowered in fear. Daemon did not land, nor did he challenge the throne directly. He sent a message. His dragon unleashed a torrent of flame over the docks, burning a fleet of green ships to cinders. And then he was gone. The meaning was clear: King's Landing was not safe. Nowhere was safe. Rhaenyra was coming. In the Red Keep, Aegon II sat upon the Iron Throne, but he did not feel like a king. His mother, Alicent, paced before him, her face lined with exhaustion. "We must strike back," she insisted. "The people must see strength." But Aegon's wounds from the coronation battle had not yet healed. He was still weak, still unsure of himself. Sir Criston Cole, battered and humiliated from his loss at Harrenhal, clenched his fists. "They are winning," he admitted. "Rhaenyra has the Riverlands. She has the North, the Vale, and Driftmark. We must act before it is too late." Aemon stepped forward, his one sapphire eye gleaming with cold fury. "Then let us take the battle to them," he said. "We have Vhagar." Alicent's breath caught. She knew what her son was suggesting. Aemon smirked. "Let us do what they fear most. Let us burn Dragonstone to the ground." At Dragonstone, Rhaenyra's war council gathered. Daemon, Harwin, Corlys Velaryon, Rhaenys Targaryen, Jaehaerys Velaryon, Lord Blackwood, the lords who still honored her father's will. "The Greens are faltering," Harwin said, his knuckles still bruised from his battle at Harrenhal. "They lost the Riverlands. Their armies are stretched thin." "They are desperate," Corlys agreed. "That makes them more dangerous." Rhaenyra was silent for a long moment, her golden eyes burning with fury. "My son's blood has been spilled," she finally said, "and for that, we will burn them in return." The council murmured in agreement. Then Jaehaerys spoke. "Let me lead the attack," he said. Rhaenyra turned sharply. "You are my heir. I will not risk you." But Jace stood firm. "You sent me to rally our allies. I did that. But now I must fight. For Lucerys. For our family." Harwin placed a hand on his son's shoulder, pride and sorrow in his eyes. "He is ready," Harwin murmured to Rhaenyra. "Let him show the realm who he is." For a moment, the queen hesitated. Then she nodded. "We ride at dawn," she said. And so, the final battle for the Iron Throne was set. Dragons would fly, fire would reign, and Westeros would never be the same again. The skies above Westeros burned. From Dragonstone to King's Landing, the war that had begun with whispers and treachery now roared with the fury of dragons. Rhaenyra had waited long enough. Her forces had rallied the Riverlands. The North, the Vale, and Driftmark all stood with her. Harwin Strong, ever her shield, led the ground forces, while Daemon, Jaehaerys, and Rhaenys took to the sky. And at dawn, they marched on King's Landing. The city was not unprepared. The Greens had fortified the Red Keep, gathering every last loyal soldier to hold the capital. Aegon II sat upon the Iron Throne, shaking with fear but unwilling to flee. Aemond, however, was not afraid. He stood at the walls, watching as dragons darkened the sky. Vhagar's massive wings blocked out the sun. "Let them come," he murmured, a cruel smile forming on his lips. "Let us end this." As the sun rose, the battle for King's Landing began. Daemon and Caraxes struck first, diving from the clouds to unleash fire upon the city gates. The streets turned to chaos. Rhaenyra's army, led by Harwin Strong and the black banners of House Targaryen, surged forward, cutting through the green defenders. But then, a monstrous roar filled the sky. Vhagar had taken flight, and upon her back, Aemon Targaryen sought vengeance. With a single command, he turned the tide of battle. Vhagar's fire engulfed entire streets, turning soldiers and civilians alike into ash. The people screamed. The city burned. And then, from the clouds, Jacaerys and Vermax came to meet him. Jace had never been a boy of war, but this was not a battle of swords. This was a battle of dragons. Vermax and Vhagar met in the stormy skies above the Red Keep. Aemon laughed as he swooped toward Jace, his sapphire eye gleaming. "You think you can defeat me, boy," he sneered. "You are nothing." But Jace was not afraid. "You killed my brother," he growled, "and I will make you pay." The battle was vicious. Vermax was smaller, faster, weaving through the air while Vhagar pursued like a beast from nightmares. But in the end, size was not enough. Jace found his momentas. Vhagar turned. Vermax darted underneath, his claws raking against the great beast's belly. Aemon cursed, struggling to regain control, and in that moment, Jace struck the killing blow. Vermax clawed through Vhagar's throat, and with a final shuddering roar, the largest dragon in Westeros fell from the sky. Aemon had time for only a single scream. Then he and his dragon crashed into the Red Keep, crushing the towers beneath them. The city shook with the impact. The Greens had lost their greatest weapon. With Aemon dead and the battle raging in the streets, the Red Keep was no longer safe. Aegon II, bleeding from wounds, abandoned by his sworn brothers, sat upon the Iron Throne. The doors burst open, and Rhaenyra stood before him. She was not the girl he had once mocked. She was a queen, her armor black as night, Syrax roaring in the distance. "You stole my throne," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Aegon's breath was ragged. "It was mine. I was the king." She stepped forward. "Number, you were a thief, and you will die as one." Aegon reached for his sword, but he was too slow. Before he could rise, Harwin Strong stepped forward and drove his blade through the usurper's chest. Aegon gasped, his blood spilling over the throne. And with that, the war was over. The streets of King's Landing were lined with bodies. The Red Keep had been claimed by its rightful ruler. Rhaenyra ascended the Iron Throne, her crown gleaming in the candlelight. The people knelt. The Greens were destroyed. Alicent was taken prisoner, her sons dead, her dynasty broken. The 7 kingdoms belonged to Rhaenyra Targaryen. But victory had come at a price. Jacaerys, wounded in the battle, knelt before his mother, blood staining his tunic. "You have won, mother," he murmured. Rhaenyra placed a hand on his cheek. "No, my son," she whispered. "We have all lost something." But still, the realm was hers. And as the city burned, Rhaenyra Targaryen, the queen who won, sat upon the Iron Throne. For now, because in Westeros, peace is always temporary, and the cost of fire and blood is never truly paid.